As a brief introduction, I don't come to Whitehead from a traditional background in metaphysics. I come from a craft. I'm a mastering engineer, which means I work at the final stage of record production, making the last decisions before a piece of music is released to meet the world. Every day in my mastering work, there is a moment when the meters are satisfied and yet the track is not right. The numbers on the screen don't reflect the reality in the room. Sure enough, the loudness target has been met, the peak levels are under control, the phase is aligned. Every quantifiable parameter reads green. And still in a quiet room, the engineer knows something is wrong. Not wrong in a way a meter can point to, but wrong in the way a sentence can be grammatically correct and still dishonest. When the track is compliant, but it is not yet coherent. I have sat in that moment thousands of times. I want to begin there because I think Whitehead helps us describe what is happening in the gap between measurement and felt experience with unusual precision. We do not hear music as a series of isolated sonic facts. We hear it as an unfolding pattern, a becoming of many elements into a felt whole. Whitehead gives us a name for that with concrescence, the process by which many data are taken up into one experience, arriving at what he calls satisfaction. If that is how music is heard, then one central aesthetic question becomes the quality of that achieved unity. This brings us to beauty. For Whitehead, beauty is not mere prettiness, and it is not a decorative afterthought. In Adventures of Ideas, beauty is a serious criterion. It names an achieved relation between harmony and intensity. Harmony is what allows differences to belong together, while intensity is what gives an experience vividness and force. Major beauty does not erase contrast for the sake of comfort. It holds contrast in proportion. It allows difference to remain real without letting the whole fall apart. When harmony loses the courage to include discord, beauty becomes trivial and anesthesia replaces satisfaction. That matters because it gives us a way to talk about artistic rightness that is neither sentimental nor rigidly technical. A beautiful work in this sense is not just smooth or pleasant. It has structure, life, tension, and order. Its parts belong together without becoming flat. Such beauty is not only a property of artworks. It also depends on habits of attention, on what a culture learns to notice, sustain, and value. And so aesthetics becomes a discipline of salience. What a culture learns to make vivid, it makes easier to value. What it renders marginal, it makes harder to care about. That is very close to a large-scale version of the kind of judgment mastering often requires. Mastering is the last act before a piece of recorded music goes into circulation. The engineer receives a mix and prepares it for distribution across playback systems, such as headphones, car speakers, vinyl, streaming platforms. The job includes clear technical constraints. For instance, Spotify recommends an integrated loudness around -14 loudness units full scale. Apple has true peak recommendations to reduce codec distortion, and sure enough, lossy encoders can produce artifacts if the signal is pushed too hard. These things matter, and they are real limits, but they do not answer the whole question. Two masters can meet the same specifications and feel entirely different. One can feel balanced, alive, proportionate, and satisfying over repeated listening. Another can feel bright, insistent, and superficially impressive, yet somehow thinner, harsher, or more exhausting. That is often the difference between a record that invites return and one that burns itself out upon arrival. This is where Whitehead's warning about misplaced concreteness becomes useful. A loudness number is real as far as it goes, but it is still an abstraction from the reality of experience, including what is called perceptual loudness. Problems begin when the numeric abstraction is mistaken for the thing itself. That mistake is easy to make in contemporary music culture because so much of our listening environment privileges what is immediate, vivid, and easily classified. Streaming platforms have improved some things. For instance, loudness normalization is better than the worst period of loudness escalation. But normalization does not remove the pressure toward surface impact, it merely changes its form. Recommendation systems sort tracks by measurable behaviors like skips, completions, saves, and replay value. Short previews clearly reward music that announces itself quickly. Platform descriptors such as loudness, energy, and valence turn certain aspects of music into machine-legible features, none of which needs to be malicious to have aesthetic consequences. It simply creates conditions in which immediate surface is rewarded more consistently than slow disclosure, negative space, long arcs of development, or the subtler weight of relation. Whitehead's distinction between presentational immediacy and causal efficacy gives us a helpful way to think about this. Presentational immediacy is the vividness of what appears clearly in the present moment. Causal efficacy is deeper and less sharply outlined. It is the felt inheritance of what has come before, the weight of prior occasions pressing into the present moment. Whitehead writes that causal efficacy is heavy with the contact of things gone by, which lay their grip on our immediate selves. In music, presentational immediacy is what grabs us right away. Causal efficacy has more to do with felt depth, accumulated consequence, and the sense that something has grown from a moment rather than merely appearing. And presentational immediacy is by nature parasitic on causal efficacy. Without the felt inheritance of the past pressing into the present, those vivid surfaces could not arise at all. A listening culture trained only for immediate surface will become less sensitive to the deeper forms of relation on which aesthetic satisfaction depends. Mastering, practiced carefully, can resist that reduction. The first pass I make on a track is not with meters. No loudness display, no spectrogram, no analyzer, just listening. The first question is not what needs fixing. It is where does this move me and where does it lose me? What this requires from the engineer is not just technical skill, but attentional discipline. The ability to delay reaction, receive the work as an inherited whole, and listen before imposing a solution. In Whitehead's terms, it is a discipline of prehension, an attempt to feel the full causal depth of the work before imposing any determinant criterion on it. It gives the work a chance to appear before it is processed as a technical problem. After that first pass, I try to name the center of the track's intent in one sentence. What is this song trying to do? Not in a grand or mystical sense, but rather plainly. Is it trying to feel intimate, relentless, fragile, ecstatic, warm, or cold? In this way, one could even say that the engineer helps guide the track toward a more definite satisfaction, not by imposing value from outside, but by clarifying relations already present within it. Once that center is clear, the technical decisions become more answerable. Equalization is not there to show expertise. Compression is not there to make the track seem expensive or forceful. Such tools should serve the emerging coherence of the work. They should make the music more fully itself. This is also why restraint matters so much. Protecting negative space is not the absence of action. It is often a difficult decision itself. It means refusing to fill every gap, refusing to force every contrast into the foreground, and refusing to let intensity crowd out proportion. Some of the felt depth of a record depends on allowing space for arrival, weight, and relation to register. A listener who is given room may hear more than a listener whose attention is constantly seized and fatigued. In this vein, there is a simple test I return to often. Does the master still sound good when turned down? If a track collapses at lower volume, it was relying on level to do work that balance should have been doing. But if it keeps its internal proportions at conversational volume, that usually means something more durable has been achieved. The coherence is in the relations themselves, not in the force with which they are delivered. This brings me to a criterion I want to name directly. I call it durable coherence. A master exhibits durable coherence when its parts remain in relation across repeated listening, different volumes, and varied playback contexts, without losing the structures of tone and contrast that keep the piece alive. Durable coherence is Whitehead's major beauty tested at the scale of a single artifact. Highs and lows held together, intensity modulated by proportion, and harmony that includes rather than excludes the difficult. In this case, better is not maximum stimulus or greater impact on first contact. Better is a structure of relations that holds. Durable coherence invites return. At this point, I want to carefully widen the frame. I will not claim that mastering a record turns someone into an ecologist, or that studio work straightforwardly yields a philosophy of civilization, but my time behind the mastering desk and my time reading Whitehead have provoked thoughts which converge on some crucial points. Ecological civilization, at least in the Whiteheadian sense, asks for more than policy adjustments or technical management. It asks for a different quality of perception, an ability to feel relation, inheritance, consequence, and limit. It asks us not to treat what is immediately visible or measurable as the whole of reality. Aesthetic practices can train exactly that capacity. That is why mastering belongs in this discussion at all. It is a small practice, but what it trains at its best is the ability to feel a present moment as shaped by what preceded it and consequential for what follows. Ecological culture will need forms of attention capable of perceiving relation, consequence, and limit, not as abstract principles, but as felt realities. That is what careful listening disciplines. And so the connection to ecology is not metaphorical. The same reduction of relational value to ranked metrics governs both platform recommendation and extractive resource management. Engagement metrics flatten musical dynamics the way yield figures flatten ecological systems. In both cases, what the metric cannot capture is what gets sacrificed. In both cases, what gets sacrificed is causal depth and ultimately beauty. This has historical precedent. The Japanese tradition of Satoyama, the cultivated transitional landscape between mountain and flatland, managed across centuries through continuous practices of use, restraint, and renewal, developed a mode of perception in which aesthetic judgment and ecological stewardship were not separable acts. To perceive the Satoyama as beautiful was already to perceive it as constituted by inherited relations, such as seasonal rhythms, cultivated biodiversity, and the felt presence of generations of practice embedded in the land. I am not claiming that the mastering studio is a Satoyama, but the structural point is the same. When a practice names aesthetic attention as attention to inherited relation, the perception it trains ceases to be merely local. In mastering, the risk is that a song gets flattened by a system, a trend, a tool, a measurement, or an engineer's ego. In institutions, the risk is that a person gets flattened by a score, a category, a profile, a risk flag, or a procedural verdict. These domains differ greatly in scale and moral stakes, but the underlying distinction is stable in that reality exceeds what the system can register, and both situations beg the same question. How should a human being attend, judge, and preserve what matters while operating under conditions that reward speed, simplification, measurement, and capture? None of this is an argument against measurement or technology itself. Metrics, standards, and systems matter, and of course we use them every day. Whitehead himself had no interest in abandoning abstraction as such. He was a mathematician before he was a philosopher. He did not oppose abstraction, he opposed forgetting that abstractions are abstractions. When the abstraction is mistaken for the reality, something has gone wrong that no specification can diagnose. The mastering engineer inherits a world of prior decisions, the songwriter's whims, the arranger's choices, the mixer's balances. The engineer prehends that inherited world and must attend to its full causal depth while producing a result that listeners will encounter primarily as surface material. The craft question, therefore, is whether the surface retains access to the depth or whether the depth has been sacrificed for the surface. And so the goal is not to banish the meter, the goal is to restore the relation between measure and meaning. That relation is fragile. In mastering, it can be lost very easily. A track can become louder, brighter, denser, and more immediately impressive while becoming less truthful to itself. Something similar can happen in a culture. Systems can become more efficient, more optimized, more legible to administration, while becoming less capable of supporting depth, patience, or real participation in a shared world. That is why the moment I began with matters to me, when the meters look perfect and something still sounds wrong. That moment is small, but it points beyond the studio. It asks whether we are willing to confuse surface success with coherence. It asks whether we will treat the visible and measurable as the whole, or whether we will still make room for forms of judgment that answer to more than compliance. Whitehead writes in Adventures of Ideas that the teleology of the universe is directed to the production of beauty. Music mastering will not redeem a civilization, but it can, in a small way, refuse the narrowing of what beauty is allowed to mean. It can preserve a space where relation matters more than force, where judgment is more than compliance, and where listening remains open to something that meters cannot fully convey. When I decide that a track is done, I am not signing off on numbers alone. I am making a more difficult judgment. That the contrasts now hold together, that the intensity is in proportion, and that the piece can meet a listener without collapsing into mere stimulus. That is durable coherence, a process that has been truly perceived and honored.